Why did you select Levittown to live?
We were looking for a place to buy a home. We looked at Levittown, and we liked the homes here. We liked the advantages that Levittown seemed to offer in comparison to other cities. And we understood that it was going to be all white, and we were very happy to buy a home here.
How about your children? Have you talked with them about the Myers?
We have tried to keep the discussions away from the children. I feel that it's something that we adults should solve without bringing the children into it any more than we have to. We're doing it for the children, but I don't feel that they are old enough to understand the problem as it is.
Samantha attends a majority black middle school.
My grandparents have a lot of, they're very racist against African Americans and, other races, but it's 2012, so they have to, push that aside, and they'll be like, no, that's wrong to be, you want to stick with your own race, and I'm like, no, I'm friends with everyone.
Do you think a Negro family moving here will affect the community as a whole?
Definitely.
In what way?
I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they are allowed to move in here in any number.
Can you give a basis for that judgment?
Yes, we used to live in Washington, D.C., and we saw a very good example of that there.
The repetition of an experience that was distasteful.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are brand new here, welcome. My name is Pearl, and if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now today guys, I want to talk about something I actually came across a couple years ago, and I just never publicly talked about it. I remember speaking about it with a couple of my friends, but it wasn't something that I kind of made a public statement about. So I wanted to go ahead and start the conversation and make this video. Now, if you're not sure what a Whitopia is or anything like that, there is a great movie that kind of structures back in the day of kind of how this began and how this started. So if you haven't seen this movie, I'm going to insert it here. It is on Hulu. Definitely check it out. If you're not a reader, if you are a reader, definitely check out the book Whitopia. It is a really good read, nonfiction, and just really has a lot of great points. Something I really love about Rich Benjamin is that he really talks about how racism is not necessarily something that we should be focusing on because of how insidious that it can be depending on the area, person, the culture, the climate. And it's something that I'm noticing right now. A lot of people are talking about racism. Am I racist? Am I not a racist? But for me, I feel as if we really need to be focusing more on anti-blackness. It's more easier to pinpoint, see, and kind of pull out. Whereas with racism, you can have the people who say things such as...
It's one of my long-standing pet peeves about the American media is that we tend to personalize everything and make everything into this long, gooey, personalized issue, so that when people talk about race, it becomes, oh, well, I once had this Asian girlfriend, or it becomes, I love that black neighbor, or it becomes, I don't dislike the white people I work with, and it becomes this therapeutic, sentimental idea of how are we all getting along. And I acknowledge we've made a lot of progress since my parents' generations, and interpersonally, it's a delightful country where we're all getting along better. Now the question becomes, how does the economy shake out? How does neighborhoods shake out, and schools and public resources shake out? And that's what I call structural racism. The policies, the resources, the power, the spending that still shake out and leave us as segregated today racially in terms of neighborhoods and education as we were in 1970.
Aside from the effect on property values, do you have against the Myers?
The whole thing centers around the word integration. Well, as Mr. Myers said, because his home has been anything but peaceful since he moved in. He's got 3 children, and evidently he feels that they will be accepted socially. And I don't feel that they ever will be. But the whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites. But the only way they're going to do that is by education and by bettering themselves, not by pushing in the way they have here.
Do you intend to move?
At the time, no. It's a pretty impossible situation. We have our home here, and if the colored move in and run real estate values down, there are a lot of us, the GIs particularly, who are going to be more or less stuck with their homes.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here, one of the main reasons was because it was a white community. And that's the only place I intend to live. If I have to leave Levittown, I will do so.
The vast majority of white Americans have really never been in a position where we've had to think actively about race and racism. In fact, we sort of have the privilege historically and still today of being really oblivious to the lived experiences of people of color. So then when those experiences get brought to our attention, either because people of color talk about them or some racial incident takes place or some study comes out demonstrating, discrimination, we're usually caught very much off guard. We're sort of in that la-la land of believing that, we're sort of in this post-racial place. And unfortunately, it's been that way for a long time. It's not just a modern phenomenon. White folks going back 40, 50 years did not, even in the early 60s, think that racism was really a big deal worth focusing very much attention on. A very small minority realized that it was. But the vast majority of whites said at that time that people of color had equal opportunity with white folks. So I think it's difficult because to be white is to be in that sort of bubble of obliviousness where you don't have to think about it. And if you don't have to think about it, you don't get a lot of practice talking about it. And if you don't have a lot of practice talking about it, when you finally have to, you usually don't have the language, you don't have the skills. It's like having a book club where people of color and white folks have all been asked to read the same book. And in this case, it's the book of their collective life. People of color have read 400 pages, white folks have read the preface, and then we're supposed to come together and have a conversation. It's not easy.
And so one of the main points of the book is, on the one hand, it's a travelogue. This is my experience traveling to these places: Georgia, Utah, Idaho, the whitest, fastest growing communities in America. But on the other hand, it sort of exposes how we have segregation in this day.
Whites needed to set up, quote, Whitopias. That's such a great name. I gotta give them credit for that. Very clever, very clever. So obviously Whitopias are, places where it's utopia because there's only white people and they've managed to exclude everyone else. It doesn't sound that great to me, but I guess that's his version of heaven.
In other words, how segregation doesn't require prejudice or ill will or animus necessarily. And so I talk about the intent doctrine. You can have animus or prejudice or segregation without any intent. So how do we move forward? How do these issues play out now that we have a black president? And one of the arguments is that they're unrelated. In other words, even with a black president, we're still dealing with these matters, and potentially it could even be worse in the sense that these issues may get swept under the rug. And finally, I'll say what we're seeing in the news today is a shakedown of a Whitopia versus an abomination. Abomination we could call a country that is multicultural, happy with its diversity, but still residentially segregated. And then we have Whitopia, these enclaves that I talk about, where immigration's a big fear.
But by immigration policies endorsed by the Democratic Party. These include increasing levels of legal immigration, allowing illegal immigrants to stay in the U.S., and incentivizing low-income foreigners to immigrate by providing welfare benefits regardless of immigration status. Due to such policies, more than 40 million immigrants now live in the U.S., and 54% of Mexican and Central American immigrants aged 25 to 64 don't have a high school diploma or GED, as compared to 7% of people born in the USA. These individuals have limited earning power and congregate in poor neighborhoods.
High taxes are a big fear. There's a lot of hatred towards the public sector and public spending. And I have to point out that there's a history behind this. There's a backstory. In other words,
do you think Myers will be able to live here comfortably?
Comfortably? No.
What course of action are you going to follow?
I'll do what I can to help to get them out legally and peacefully. And as far as accepting them socially, if that's what you mean, I could never do that, and I could never do that.
This is not to say that only white people are trying to get away from black people. especially in America, because that is definitely not the case. As you can see, Black people are definitely wanting to build their own communities and build up their own culture within their own environments. That is something that is also on the rise.
Public service announcement. Excuse me. If y'all didn't know, this is the MSC, and frankly, there's just too many white people in here, and this is a space for people of color. So just be really cognizant of the space that you're taking up, because it does make some of us POCs uncomfortable when we see too many white people in here. It's only been open for 4 days, and frankly, there's the whole university for a lot of y'all to be at, and there's very few spaces for us. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
And after that little speech, there was
applause.
But to me, this is so shocking that there are these spaces designed for POCs as if they're not welcome everywhere.
These as if they're not welcome everywhere.
These as if they're not welcome everywhere.
Sorry, pre-Trump election, I did a two-year, 27,000-mile journey through the whitest parts of this country. And it really was a prelude to the issues that Trump would use, how he uses race as a proxy for immigration, for so-called voter fraud, as a pretext to repeal public services like ACA. And so you can have this dynamic where you have perfectly nice people, but you had a broiling resentment that also has to do with demographics and white panic that Trump really saw and he's maximized.
And what do they hear when the president says, quote, "I'm not a racist"? What do you think people are hearing from that?
Oh, they personalize it. Oh, he must not be a racist because we see what's in his heart. But as your other panelists were saying, racism is about power. Now that he has the means and the will to institute these policies, whether we're talking about a wall, whether we're talking about DACA, whether we're talking about voter suppression, that's the real crux of the matter. Personally, I don't really care what's in Donald Trump's heart. I don't care about his statement he made today. The question becomes, we have a man in power who can give a green light to people who otherwise might not be racist to have these views. And when we really look at King's words, when we look at a letter from a Birmingham jail, he really took to task moderates and said, it's one thing for obvious racists, we can dismiss them, but the rubber hits the road when moderates do not stick up for racist viewpoints and what we could achieve in this country.
Now, that is not to say that every single white person is feeling this way or thinking this way or is racist to the core. However, it is possible to have underlying racism while being respectful.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed.
While being very cautious of what's going on within the world, whether the day and age, which we are now seeing right here, whether it's 1957, 2009, 2012. This is a recurring issue that I feel we need to pinpoint, and it's going to be easier to do that when we're looking at the anti-blackness within all cultures, all spectrums, not just black and white, but everyone.
وين رايح؟ يا عريس؟
لو سمحت ممكن شاحن؟
الكهرباء قطع جوه ولا ايه؟
I know that I am still racist to some extent now. Race still colors the way that I act around people, and I try my best to unlearn the things that I've learned.
وبالذيابه هذول بس ترى حلوين يعني بسم الله عليهم.
اسمع ترى
هي جاهزه مع الياهل
يعني ويا الياهل خلاص يعني يا تاخذ هذه يا تاخذ نعومي كامبل.
What sparked this video was that I'm seeing Asian people rap, and it's one thing to see like white rappers get accolades for doing something mediocre. You know, the people who created rap, black folks, were harassed for making this music, were put down for making this music, and are still continued to be looked down upon. Whereas if somebody who was white raps, it's a cool and safe thing to listen to.
But that doesn't mean I don't roll. Just look around you. We're taking over the whole 5th floor. So if you want to special loans, just let me know. And I can hook you up with getting that quick cash flow. We have a referral program that offers commissions for you. And let's be honest, your friends want to use us too. Because we're our best. We're the best. And there's no doubt that we'll out-factor the rest. Now with that said and done, your head's good and spun. I hope you had fun. Because BJD, you know that I'm...
And I'm also I'm looking within myself and my own community and seeing that there are also Asian rappers, and my hope is that these Asian rappers stand up for the rights of darker skinned folks, seeing that the art form that they've chosen and the art form that they're able to share their feelings and profit from were made by darker skinned brothers and sisters for the purpose of expressing themselves and the inequalities that they experienced. Yeah, I would just hate for an Asian rapper to be like, on one hand, they're rapping about whatever they're rapping about, and then on the other hand, they're just like, oh, black people are like this, this, this.
Music.
يخرب بيتك الأوضة والنور ليه؟ ما أنت مضلمة خلقة.
لا مؤاخذة معلش احنا مضطرين نطعم كل اللي في البيت.
نطعم؟ ليه؟ فاكرنا صوماليين؟
معلش ما انا برضه قلت يعني انت بيضة وانا بيضة زي ما خالف صباع العدوى.
دي مش نسوان، دي علاج بتعمل لي لبخة. مش شايف اللبخة اللي أنا فيها؟
اوعى كده اوعى كده.
But it's not just in films that we see negative depictions. It's also present in newspapers, plays.
فين الفيجو التشبيه؟
بتحبني يا محفوظ؟
بحبك وده وقت حب الله يحرقك أكتر ما أنت محروقة. بص أنا هشوفك بكرة ها؟ مش بالليل، امشي الليل ده من حياتك.
ماشي ماشي.
Behind these futures of racism is a deep-rooted history of oppression hidden, the Arab slave trade. From the 16th to 19th century, millions of Africans were raided, kidnapped, and shipped to the Middle East to be sold as slaves.
Within Arab societies, Middle Eastern societies, you have a legacy of slavery that hasn't been fully discussed, fully addressed within various Arab and Middle Eastern communities. Much of that, goes back to centuries where, there were negative attitudes, racist attitudes towards enslaved peoples, particularly those who came from sub-Saharan Africa.
54% of the Brazilian population is of African descent. You can see the legacy of the slave trade in the faces here. Brazil was the last country in the Western world to abolish slavery.
If you turn on the TV in Brazil, there are hardly any black actors or presenters, hardly any black journalists. This is across all of the mainstream channels. We are not seen there. The invisibility of black people in spaces of power is glaring.
A first. The winner, Nayara Justino, was dark-skinned and unmistakably black.
A Globeleza 2014 é Nayara.
Not everyone approved.
Online trolls called Justino a monkey, a darkie. A few months later, Globo had Justino replaced. It set the results of the vote aside and simply picked another woman. Globo insisted that its decision had nothing to do with skin color, that the choice came down to artistic fitness for the role. It said artistic merit prevailed.
There was an official whitening policy in Brazil. The initiative that brought European immigrants here after the abolition of slavery was not accidental. It was done in order to whiten the population, because they believed that within 200 years, there would be no more blacks in Brazil. But we're still here, in this country, which still denies its African origins, and which runs on the idea that the whiter, the better.
¿Qué cosa es ser afroperuano?
Invisibles.
Yo siento que soy invisible cuando le digo a alguien que existe el racismo en el Perú y no me creen.
No me llamo ni morenita, ni zambita, ni morocha.
Invisibles.
Como que nos reducen a una cosa, un pedazo de carne, ¿me entiendes?
O sea, vas a buscar trabajo y tú ves en una página de periódico que dice, no sé, alta y no sé qué, te es clara.
Y es que todo lo negro parece estar vinculado hacia lo negativo.
Invisibles.
Cuando digo yo no cocino, yo no bailo, yo no toco ningún instrumento, me dicen, ¿cómo puedes ser negra? Es una negra bamba.
O hay negros que ya no quieren ser negros.
Invisibles. Alguna vez me dijeron, ¿por qué no te le hacías el pelo para que te veas más bonito? Yo me veo bonito como soy.
No hay color ni marrón, ni moreno, sino negro.
Anti-blackness is pretty much rooted in Filipino culture. And what I mean by that is, we are told at a very young age that black is bad. Black skin is bad. So we are given whitening soap so we can pretty much look more white. I started using whitening soap at around the age 5 or 6. And it was called Perla. I don't know if they make it anymore. That's what I used. And, you know, I was like 5 or 6, so I didn't really think anything of it. But then as I got older, I started to see why. My caretaker used whitening soap, Perla, glutathione, papaya soap, all that, and I'm fairly dark. So, of course, it was given to me.
That's kind of what America is. It's a bunch of individuals from different cultures that experienced their own form of trauma and violence, and they all came together to a new country and brought their trauma with them. What do you think is going to happen from there? That's why violence and conflict and confrontation and lastly, race is such a huge factor when it comes to America's upbringing. And eventually, if these immigrants eventually catch a stride in terms of developing their own foundation and they're able to work through the initial trauma of moving to a new country, now you start developing identity issues. You can even call them first world problems or whatever. But imagine an immigrant being stuck in between two cultures. This is something that I've experienced myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too, where even though my background is Vietnamese, I feel really, really removed from it because I grew up in the States, but I will never be accepted in the mainstream culture of America, and I won't be fully accepted back in Vietnam.
Do you think Myers will be able to live here comfortably?
Comfortably? No.
I've already heard stories where people are trying to, let's just say, get in touch with their roots, so they'll move back to Nambia or India, and these people from these initial countries won't even recognize you as Indian, African, Vietnamese, the list goes on and on and on. And that develops another sort of psychological dissonance or psychological trauma as well. So not only will you not be accepted by your own people, you will also face the discrimination, the prejudice, and the racism amongst the mainstream or the majority. So not only is your family traumatized if they're first generation by leaving their country because it was being bombed and moved to a new one, and then they're trying to make ends meet constantly in survival mode, they have to deal with the racism and the prejudice, and on top of that, their child ends up dealing with the prejudice and racism. The trauma just continues to grow from there.
I think it's purely a white problem, not a Negro problem.
In what way?
I think it is the feeling of the majority group which will influence the property, not the minority group.
Those who want an integrated community take their stand based on their own deep feelings of what a community should be.
Of course, we've all discussed this and we've all said that the answer to the problem is eventually when you find that there are no more areas to which a white person can move without having a Negro family in. Well, that would be the best end that there could be to segregation, and it is probably something that will happen in the future, perhaps in the near future.
Ser afro es alegría.
Diversidad.
Herencia cultural.